I mean, I'm not someone who usually gets really like confrontationally angry at people. And the reason for that is probably because I write horror. So if
Okay.
I'm mad at you, I'm going to kill you on the page instead of yelling at you in person.
Let's suppose you're writing a book, and we'll
Mhm.
get to some of the different ones you've written, but how long does it take? How long does the process look like for that?
Ooh, that is a loaded question because it depends. So my last book to come out was last July, and that was A Misfortune of Lake Monsters. And so Lake Monsters is a young adult horror novel, and I wrote the draft of it. And I don't even want to say the draft, but by the time it was ready to publish, it probably took about a year, right? And then I was between literary agents at that time. And so I had to find a new literary agent. And then, of course, by the time you get a literary agent, they want to also make edits. So that's another, I don't know, 6 months to a year. And you rewrite it maybe, I don't know, twice, 5 times, whatever the case may be. And then Lake Monsters went out on submission through a literary agent. So that's another year. And it's not writing so much as it is you just sort of waiting for them to like come back with you or to come back to you with an answer. And Lake
So,
Monsters never sold.
it what?
It never sold through a literary agent.
Okay.
So my literary agent and I parted ways, and I saw a smaller press that had put out a call for young adult horror. And I'm like, sure, why not? So I submitted that on my own. And that was another 2 months, I think, until I heard back from them. And then it was a year and a half before it was published. But during that time, I rewrote the book again because they had developmental edits.
Okay. It seems
It's a long
so
time.
yeah, so the writing portion almost seems like it's not the main portion. There's so many other pieces that have to come together to make this um
Yes.
happen. I have a my son's friend, he is getting ready to publish a series of novels, big fiction, thick
Nice.
books, but he's having to use an editor in order
Mhm.
to get through that. Now, are you essentially your own editor since you kind of do that during the day?
So, yes and no. I'm a very good editor and a very good proofreader, so I'm able to do a lot that other people who don't have those talents can do, right? However, once you have a publisher or an agent, they are also going to want edits and they also have their own editing skills, right? So, let me just put it to you this way. I understand why people maybe think about self publishing because it is a very long period of time between when you think you are ready and when your publisher thinks you are ready or your agent thinks you are ready or whatever the case may be. Uh, because that takes up so much time, I understand the draw of self publishing.
Do you think that there might be a little bit of gatekeeping that goes on with these companies?
Yes and no. And this is my answer to a lot of things. Yes and no. Um, there is some gatekeeping in some respects, but the bottom line when you're going through an agent or a publisher, every publisher has their own sort of look and feel, if you know what I mean. And so they might like your idea, but like they want to make some changes to it. So it's gatekeeping, but it's gatekeeping for a reason. They're not necessarily looking to keep you out of the publishing game, so to speak, just for kicks.
So you say that it's almost like a publisher they have a brand,
They do.
and essentially they want to make sure that what you've written fits their brand, sort of.
That's sort of what it is. Like for instance, the publisher who published A Misfortune of Lake Monsters is Camcat Publishing. And they tend to specialize in books that have very likable characters. And I tend not to write super likable characters, like main characters. It's just a fluke that A Misfortune of Lake Monster has a character set that is incredibly likable. Like, you would want to be friends with some of these people.
Uh-huh.
But when I submitted my next book to them, Meat Sweats, which will come out next year with a different publisher, that was really not their thing. And it wasn't the type of thing that they could developmentally edit where the character would be more likable in their style of likable. Like, I think she's super likable, my main character. But let's face it, she's a cannibal. I mean, how likable can a cannibal be, right?
That would be off-putting to some people.
Yeah. And it's just not their brand. So, the publisher that I am going through, this is maybe more their style. And I think particularly for horror publishers, they have sort of a thing that they're known for. Maybe they like really hardcore, gory stuff, or maybe they don't. And maybe a book can be edited to be that way, or maybe it can't.
Okay. So would you say you write, so when you write horror, do you feel like you write hardcore levels of
Not
horror or how?
particularly.
Okay.
I don't think my novels are particularly gory. Now, and when I say gory, I mean, if you've ever read anything by an author named Poppy Z. Bright, Bright wrote this book. It was actually another cannibal book. And it's so disturbing that it is the kind of thing that you are going to love or you're going to hate.
Okay.
And it's incredibly graphic. My books are not graphic. They're a little bit bloody. I mean, they're horror, right? So there's almost always got to be some blood. But they're not, I don't think anyway, particularly disturbing.
Okay. Interesting. So I feel like a lot of times when I've read horror or watched a horror movie, even for instance, it seems like it's almost like horror is usually connected to another genre at the same time within the same literary book, right? So it could be a mystery horror or it could be a comedy horror. You know what I mean? Like there's that. How do you feel your techniques tend to gravitate towards?
So it depends book by book, really. For A Misfortune of Lake Monsters, I tend to call it, and a lot of people use this term now, horror-mance. Like, you can't call it a romance because the romance genre has very, very rigid parameters. There's always got to be a happy ending, and there have to be a lot of things that happen in it.
So Romeo and Juliet can't be a romance, I guess.
Technically, no, because there's certainly no happy ending there. But
Right.
particularly for contemporary romance, if you ask a horror fan, or not a horror fan, a romance fan, what they're looking for in a book, they're probably going to tell you they want a happily ever after. For horror romance, you can stretch those boundaries because you're not calling it a romance because it is connected to something else. For Meat Sweats, I mean, if you squint, you could probably call it a horror romance. But it's pretty classically horror, but it's softer horror. For Lake Monsters, for instance, one of the funniest and most true critiques I've gotten on it, feedback from a reviewer, is that it's as though Hallmark made a horror film. Because it's kind of funny and it's a little bit sweet and it's set in a small town and it just has like sort of a very, not hokey, but it's sweet.
Yeah.
It's a sweet horror novel.
imagine. Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. All right. Let's talk a little bit about, so you have a master's degree in storytelling and horror from University of Pennsylvania. So that's
Yes.
unique. Very unique. I'm surprised you can even get that. Okay. So what personal journey led you to pursue these particular academic credentials?
Yeah. So first I'm going to tell you, because it's an unusual situation, that Penn has a master's level program that is what I call make your own fun. Your degree is in whatever your thesis or your capstone is in. So I have this master's of liberal arts in horror and storytelling because that's what my thesis was in.
Okay. So if we look through the catalog at UPenn, we're not going to see it. Got you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Keep
They
going.
don't have a horror program, much to my dismay. One day, I hope. But so for me, to get to that point, it took me 20 years to get my bachelor's degree. I started at the normal time, when you're 18, and life happens, and I ran out of money. And so I kept taking like a class here and there, and eventually when I hit, I guess I was 39, I got my bachelor's. And I honestly thought that that would be sort of where I ended, because it took me for so long to reach that point in my academic career. But so in my last year of my bachelor's degree, I had an adjunct professor who was very, very adamant about the fact that she was getting her doctoral degree not because she wanted to work in academia for the rest of her life or because she thought it would help her get a job, but because it was worth it for the love of knowledge just by itself. Her doctoral degree, I believe, is in 18th century literature depicting transgender characters. So it's very specific
Very.
and not in a way that was going to help her get a job.
Yeah.
If she wanted to go into academia, she probably could have, but she ended up leaving academia shortly after she got her doctoral degree. But that idea of like knowledge for its own sake stuck with me, right? And so, I'm working and I'm thinking, well, what do I want to do with my life here? And so getting a master's, I thought, okay, I'll get a master's in horror because I work at UPenn, I can. You know what I mean? And so it didn't quite start the way it ended, is what I will say. So I ended up getting a pretty severe case of COVID in
Oh,
that first year before the vaccines were available. And it was to the point where I was hospitalized for a couple of days.
eh,
And luckily it was at the end of the year when hospitals had a better idea of how to treat COVID.
yeah.
But
Did you have trouble breathing, or what was it like?
so it was a weird situation. I I had the little thing you put on your finger to measure your pulse
Blood. Yeah.
oxidation, your
Yeah.
blood
Yeah.
oxidation. And I had been very, very sick at home for probably about a week and a half. And about a week after that, I didn't feel terrible, but my breathing wasn't great. And I was like, oh, I'm on the mend. I'm recovering. And I put on my little pulse ox monitor and my pulse ox was down in the 80s. And that's not
Mm,
good.
no.
Yeah. So I
No.
called my doctor and she's like, no, you need to go to the hospital like right now. I'm like, all right. So I go and they're like, yeah, you're not good. And if you remember, uh, around that time, they had started talking about cytokine. I forget what it's called now, blizzards or something like that. But the fact is your body tricks yourself into thinking that you're recovering when you're not, and it's silent hypoxia is what happens.
Wow.
And I had silent hypoxia, so they put me in the
Did
hospital
you
for a
have
few
the
days.
blue nails or blue lips or
No,
any of that stuff? No.
no,
Okay.
it was just a random thing, and I ended up having double pneumonia when they admitted me to the hospital.
No.
Yeah. So that is the thing that sort of pushed me in the direction that I went, to really think about horror and building resilience and sort of how horror does that. It was just a random thing that
Yeah.
happened.
Let's say someone just wants to be a writer,
Sure.
and then we can maybe get a little bit tighter on that. But so someone wants to be a writer, they're at ground zero, they're 18 years old, whatever. What would you recommend to them? What's the path of least resistance? What's the best way to do this to get where
So
you want to be?
I'm going to give like the world's most obvious advice. If you want to be a writer, you write. That's kind of it. You write until you get to a point where you feel like your writing doesn't suck. And sometimes that's just a matter of keep writing, keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. Sometimes that's a matter of going to school and taking classes, or getting a degree in writing. Sometimes that's an issue of finding a place where you can take classes. Like here in Philly, there's a place called Blue Stoop, and it's a community organization that offers, you can take like weeks long classes. You can take a 1 day class. Sometimes they're free, sometimes they're not, but it's a really great way to sort of develop yourself as a writer. The other thing I always recommend is to join a place where you can find a writing group to critique your writing. For me, that was the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. If you join a group like that, or even the Horror Writers Association, or whatever kind of writing you're doing, you can find a group that has critique groups as part of that. It helps you understand what's wrong with your own writing by reading and critiquing other people's writing. And of course, you need to read. You need to read widely. So not just the genre you're writing in, but very like other genres that you're never going to write in. Like I don't write romance, but I occasionally pick up a romance book.
Who do you, so I we can see behind you, obviously you have a lot of books there. Is there any particular authors that you feel like well, I don't know if this maybe is two different people, either authors who have influenced you, but or also authors you like to read. Maybe they're not the same, but what do you think about that?
So right off the bat, I can tell you that when I was a kid, and maybe not even a kid, but obviously I read a lot of Stephen King as a horror writer when I was a kid. But in the 1980s and, around that time when I was sort of in my formative years as a person, we didn't really have young adult horror as a genre. So Stephen King was it. So probably not the thing that an 8-year-old or 10-year-old should be reading, yet that's what's happening when you're, that age and there's nothing else to read and you're interested.
Yeah.
But for me, when I was like, let's say in high school, I had such like a huge literary crush on Kurt Vonnegut, on John Irving, on Ralph Ellison, James Baldwin. Like those are the writers that really sort of inspired me to keep reading. Not necessarily the writers who inspired me to go in the direction I went.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the writers that sort of helped me develop as a reader and a writer. Now, as you get older and you start reading in your genre, and of course, Stephen King is in there, but writers like Poppy Z. Bright, who I mentioned, writers like Jonathan Mayberry. God, I love so many great writers. Gretchen McNeil is a young adult horror writer who was really very important to me as I was starting to move into the young adult horror writing genre. Nova Rensuma is an amazing speculative writer. Like there are just so many people I could name. The one writer that I love right now, that I recommend his book to everyone, is Gerardo Cordova Samano. He wrote a book several years ago called Monstrilio. and it's sort of a literary horror novel about grief. And it's so brilliant and it's so wonderful and unusual.
Did that story A Monster Calls, it's not based, is that based
No,
off of?
that's Patrick Ness, I believe.
Okay.
Monstrilio is When a Monster Calls, I believe, is middle grade. I might be wrong about that. It's either middle grade or young adult. Monstrilio is adult, but the basic premise, and this is not spoiling it, is that there's a couple, I believe they live in New York, who have a sick son, and the son dies. I think he's maybe around 8 years old, 10 years old. And the mother kind of has a moment of insanity and uh, digs out this kid's liver or some organ and regrows herself a boy. But it's not quite what you think.
Okay.
It's just deliciously wonderful. It's to the point, if there's a book I really love, I can tell you exactly where I was when I was reading it. And this particular book I took with me on a plane trip to Venice, Italy. And so I can tell you, I was at a bed and breakfast in Venice reading the end of this book and sobbing. And I can tell you what the room looked like, what the room smelled like, because it's so tied up in this book for me.
Wow.
It's
Very
so
cool.
good. I highly recommend it to
Well, it's
anybody,
going,
even if you're not a horror reader.
yeah. Well, it's going on my list, that's for sure. All right. Let's talk about money. So, someone wants to be a horror writer. Well, let's just say in general a writer, but I would imagine it's a feast or famine situation where you either make very little or you can make a ton. Like what do you how does that all play out with most people?
Very few people make a ton of money in writing. For me, because I tend to write a lot of short stories that get published, and I tend to publish through small publishers, you're not going to make a lot of money. Short stories can make you anywhere from zero money up to maybe $3,000 if you're very, very lucky. My average is far below the $3,000 mark, but if you, my accountant makes fun of me for this all the time, but I don't make a ton of money. Like sometimes I make zero money in a year. For an advance, for novels, when you sell a novel, depending on the publisher, you can make an advance that can be anywhere from $1,000 up to, a seven-figure advance, which most people don't get.
Would
Uh,
that require you to be known? Like, you
Not
know what I mean?
always.
Is okay.
Not always. There have been a couple of debut novelists that I know of who have gotten tremendous deals, like advances, based on the strength of what that publisher thinks that they're going to sell of that book. If it's a highly marketable idea that the marketing team behind this publisher thinks that they can sell like a gazillion copies of, you're going to get a better advance. Or if, for instance, you are, let's say, Oprah Winfrey, you've written a novel, you're very well known. They think that they can sell this horror novel that Oprah Winfrey has written. She's going to get a massive advance.
Hmm.
I also know several debut authors who have gotten these kinds of deals and then their book tanks. It happens. Basically, being a publisher is sort of betting on something that you can't really control.
Hmm.
You just never know what's going to happen. Because literally, you're going to make this deal and your book's going to come out 2 years, 3 years down the line. And who knows what's going to happen in 2 or 3 years, right?
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
So let's talk about other horror writers. Are you in communication with people who also write
yes,
horror? So
absolutely.
is there some sort of subculture community chat room, Discord?
Kind
Like
of.
when, yeah?
So There's the Horror Writers Association.
Okay.
There's also SIFWA, which is I think it's the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, which also includes horror. And so I did this thing for the first time this year, which is to go to Stoker Con, which is the Horror Writers Association annual conference. And I had been in touch with other writers before this. If you're on social media, you're of course going to get to know other writers. If you're in something like the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, of course you're going to end up getting to know other people. If you're in critique groups, you're going to get to know other writers. And of course, locally, there's community, there's book community, and you get to know people there. But StokerCon is its own special kind of thing. It was in Stamford, Connecticut this year, and you walk into the hotel and it's instant overload because you are meeting people for the first time that maybe you've known online for years. You know their name, maybe, or maybe you don't know them at all, but you're meeting like tons of people, like just a fire hose of people. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that most writers are heavily introverted. I am. Like, I need a lot of quiet time. So you're at StokerCon, and at least for me, I needed to escape like every couple of hours to go up to my hotel room to get like 20 minutes of quiet time before my brain shut off.
Yeah.
And I would just be like rocking in a corner somewhere. But horror writers in particular are some of the nicest, most positive people you will ever meet, which defies like expectation. I know that people think that horror writers are crazy, we're morose, we're deeply disturbed, and maybe some of that is true, but we're also really nice and supportive. And so StokerCon for me was really interesting this year and fun and uplifting. And it came at a time politically when I think a lot of us needed that kind of situation.
Where is it at?
It was
StokerCon?
in Stamford, Connecticut this past year. Well, this year. For the next 2 years, it'll be in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
It usually bounces around coast to coast and in the middle.
Okay. I find that interesting when you say that a lot of horror writers are very nice people, even though what you're putting on paper obviously may be very disturbing. I almost wonder if you can tell me if there's some sort of connection between getting that out of you, like people get it out of you, get it on paper, and now, okay, no more dark thoughts. There they are, and now
It's
I'm back to
1,000% like that.
sort of.
Honestly, it's therapy.
Okay. So a form of therapy.
Really is. Like if I'm mad at somebody, and I'm not someone who really like confrontationally angry at people. And the reason for that is probably because I write horror. So if I'm mad at you, I'm going to kill you on the page instead of yelling at you in person.
Names may be changed. Maybe
to
not.
Protect the innocent, or not so innocent as the case may be.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right.
But that's also part of like my horror academic work too, right? So what a lot of people don't realize is that when you are writing horror, viewing horror, reading horror, you are essentially having a practice makes perfect kind of a situation. You are training yourself to be calm in scary situations in real life.
Hey, quick time out. I just want to say that if you'd like to come on the show, email me at talesfromtheshiftpodcast@gmail.com. And we'll talk about your shift. I know that you created an anthology of horror essentially centered on menopause. So why don't you tell us about that? How did that even come about? What's that about?
So this is actually a really fun story that I love to tell because it's weird. I was on Twitter one day. This is years and years ago, like before all the other stuff started happening with Twitter. And I was thinking out loud to myself, and I'm like, and I posted this. I'm like, I'd really love to edit an anthology of horror that looks at horror through the lens of menopause. Some publishers should let me do that. And lo and behold, a publisher DM'd me, direct messaged me, and they're like, I'll let you do that. I'm like, really? It was so cool. Like, that kind of stuff never happens to me. So it was Sliced Up Press, which is a small press. It's almost a boutique press. And we developed the idea for this and put out a call for submissions. And I ended up getting some great submissions. Like, I love this book so much. Bodies Full of Burning. It's a little small volume. There are probably about a baker's dozen stories in it. And whenever I go to an event where I'm selling books, Bodies Full of Burning is what sells beyond anything else that I talk about or that sell, because I love this project so much. It is the only anthology in the world that we know of anyway, that looks at horror through the lens of menopause. The stories in it range from not quite what you would expect of horror, like it's pretty low key, up to things that make you ask, what on earth did I just read? So it's got a little bit of something for everyone. But what is beautiful about it is it's not like menopause is terrible, menopause is hot flashes, or, menopause is what, women are chewed up husks of people after menopause. Some of these stories really look at menopause in a very positive light. And I really love that about the stories. But also, if you are angry at a man or men in general, it is the most cathartic book you could ever read. And it's got lots and lots of different voices. There are, I think, 2 stories by trans men. There are stories that come from all different ethnic backgrounds and racial backgrounds, people who are gay or straight, people who fall in between. It's really incredibly well-rounded, and I love that about it. And it's just one of the best projects I've ever worked on.
So I'm trying to picture when you say that it's through the lens of menopause. What would
Right.
just pick one example story from in there? How does the story fit with menopause?
So let's see. I'm going to pick a story here. And it's hard for me to pick just one because this is like my baby. So, all right. So there's a story in here where there's a woman going through menopause, and I don't know what has been happening with her family, but they're a little bit dismissive of her, and they want her to get some help or to take a time out. So she goes on a retreat in the woods. And I don't want to spoil it for you, but she discovers her own power in menopause. It's really, there are several stories like that sort of give sort of empowerment to a woman as she's going through menopause in a way that society doesn't necessarily give women. Scientific research, for instance, medical research, there's not a lot of it happening for menopause, more so now than at any other time in history, but it doesn't get a lot of money thrown at it. And as a woman, when I go to a doctor and I talk about menopause, most doctors are a little bit dismissive. And I think that's true of a lot of women when they go to doctors for whatever reason. And so now you're starting to see more doctors who specialize in menopause, right? And so in a lot of ways, I feel like looking at horror and menopause together fits with this idea that horror is evolving as a genre, and so is the medical field in terms of menopause. There's a really interesting linkage there.
Cool. Okay. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about being a horror writer, or I guess we can say a writer in general. who would you say this career path would be for, and who should stay away from it? Who would it not be for?
I think all right, so if you make up stories in your head or have conversations with the voices in your head, writing is a field you should try. And if those voices are telling you to kill people, or hurt people, or you have like bloody scenarios in your head, then clearly horror writing is maybe up your alley. What I would say though is as far as writing goes, and this is not just horror writing, but any writing, if you are particularly sensitive to rejection, professional writing of any kind is not for you. I could paper the walls of my house like 3 or 4 times over with the number of rejections that I have gotten. And that's normal. That is a normal part of writing. If you ask Stephen King how many rejections, and I'm using Stephen King just because he's like the horror writer most people know. If you asked him early on in his career how many rejections he had received, he would probably tell you the same thing. I mean, obviously, at this point in his career, he could do anything and get it published. But it's a normal part of writing, rejection. And the key to remembering that about rejection is it's largely not about whether your story or your novel is good or bad. It's about editorial tastes. It's about whether your story fits into the larger narrative an editor wants to tell in an anthology or in a magazine. It's whether some marketing team thinks that your story or your novel is marketable, or whether it will be in a month or a year or 3 years. There are a million reasons you can get a rejection, and 99% of them are completely out of your control. And there's no better lesson that I learned in editing Bodies Full of Burning, that anthology about menopause, than that lesson. Because I had gotten stories that were phenomenally great, but I either had a story that was a little too similar to that, or it didn't quite fit the arc, the narrative arc I wanted to tell in the anthology. And so it just didn't fit. And so I had to reject a lot of stories that I loved.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I don't want to make this about me, but I've definitely had people who want to be on this show who have incredible stories and incredible
Yeah.
backgrounds, but they don't fit the show. You know what I mean? It's just, you're really cool. I love what you've done, but it's not what the idea is. So I
Yeah.
see what you're saying there.
It's
Yeah.
it's very specific to like the place that you're querying in your case, or, the agent you're querying, or the magazine or the publishing house you're soliciting in my case. Things have to match up.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So maybe you've already answered this question, but if you could change something about the horror publishing industry, what might that be?
I did talk about this a little bit when I talked about how horror writers are wonderful people, but I think outside of the horror sort of field, let's say, that people think we're weird, but we practice being scared for fun. Like, that's what we do. And so we're the people that you want to have on your team in scary real life situations. So cultivate us as friends, as employees, because we're the people you need. And we're also, this is kind of interesting to me. I think probably in the last 10 years or so, we're seeing the horror genre in terms of film get way more respect. Movies like The Substance or Sinners or anything Jordan Peele has done. They're getting nominated for awards in a way that hadn't been the case before that. And so I think that as that's happening, you're going to see horror get a little bit more respect just as a genre, but you're also going to see fewer and fewer people think that there's something seriously wrong with people who love horror.
Yeah. Are there any, you mentioned a couple of movies there. Are there any other movies that you've seen recently horror wise that you have enjoyed?
So Sinners was the one that I really just adored this year. I There's a movie called Together that I've been looking forward to seeing that I have not been able to see yet.
I've seen it.
I heard wonderful things about it.
It
What else
was
have I seen
it was
lately?
interesting. It's pretty good. Yeah, it's a unique story also, which is good.
Yeah,
It's I feel like in Hollywood these days there's so much, let's do number 6 of whatever
yeah,
because we know we'll make 100 million or whatever. I hate that so much,
yes,
because I know that there's so many great writers out there, that have written, there's so many stories that
yeah,
sit on
phenomenal
shelves,
stories.
right? They just sit on shelves and I'm like, that would be just an incredible movie. And that, oh, but we don't know if the audience will, whatever. You could probably get angry about this yourself, I would imagine.
It's all about marketing and, like, the kind of money that you have to put up to get a film made. And, like, people don't wanna take big chances with things, and so I really appreciate the film houses that do allow that. A24 has been great for that, and so I really appreciate them in a way that I don't think they could possibly understand.
Yeah. No, they seem to be sort of the recent leaders of horror movies. And I
Yeah.
guess would you say they were created because people weren't being able to get their
I
stories
don't really
published like
know
that?
their backstory so much. But I mean, for whatever reason that they started, putting out movies, I very much appreciate them.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about Meat Sweats. So, and I know I've told you that when I saw that you had a book named Meat Sweats, that was when I said I would love to have you on the show. Just for that alone, because I can tell just the way you think, I think is makes you a unique and individual that I wanted to meet. Um, but you said that there's specialized in gastro horror.
Yes.
So can you tell us what that gastro horror is? Maybe give an idea of what Meat Sweats is about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with Meat Sweats, because it makes sense. It'll make more sense to you after I tell you that. So Meat Sweats is about a young adult, a girl. She is a vegetarian, like a very stringent, strict vegetarian who accidentally becomes a cannibal, as one does, right? I am not going to tell you the circumstances under which that happens, but so gastro horror is horror that elevates food as the frightening or threatening element.
Okay.
So, if you've seen Silence of the Lambs, there is a very strong element of gastro horror, not in the film itself, because Hannibal Lecter is the cannibal, but the actual, like, meat of the story is not really about cannibalism until you get to the very end and he says he's about to have a friend for dinner. But if you watch the show, Hannibal, that is very strongly gastro horror related because you see Lecter creating these meals out of his victims. And this is what I love about gastro horror. Okay, so horror, okay, food is something we all need. It's the very first thing we do other than crying when we're born. You eat. You have to eat every single day of your life to survive. I think it's 3 days without food is what you can survive or something like that. To make it a little bit sinister is to make you part of the story. So when you're watching Hannibal Lecter create these absolutely gorgeous looking meals, you get a little hungry and you're like, am I the baddie here? There is a book that I read last year called The Eyes Are the Best Part. It's by a writer named Monica Kim. And her mother, the narrator in this book, her mother cooks these incredibly elaborate, I think it's Vietnamese meals. And you get really hungry when you're reading this. But then things happen, okay? And you're like, am I the baddie for thinking that this sounds really great to eat? It's those types of things. Um, it goes back pretty far. There are elements to gastro horror in a movie like Rosemary's Baby. Her Satanist neighbor offers Rosemary the drugged chocolate mousse at the end of the dinner party. That's gastro horror. There are particularly freaky meal scenes in movies like The Wicker Man or Midsummer. There are these communal meals, and a lot of these communal meals tie into religious themes. Oftentimes, movies will play on the idea of the Eucharist as gastro horror, which I find fascinating. So, food isn't just food in horror films and books, because it's utilizing food as the idea that it's something you have to do every day to stay alive, but it could kill you.
All right. So you regularly present research on why reading and watching horror builds resilience and coping skills. So what's that about? What are some surprising things about your research that you've revealed about consuming horror?
So, I have not done original research. Well, that's not true. I have. I've talked to horror writers about how they feel about how their resilience has been impacted by horror, by writing horror or reading horror. But a lot of the research that I've looked at to sort of inform my own work comes out of a place called the Recreational Fear Lab. And they are out of Denmark. And they look at why horror is good for you and sort of how horror physically impacts you and what that kind of looks like. So, part of the reason, as I said, that I decided to major in horror, let's say, get a degree in horror, is this research study that they did that showed horror writers are more resilient than the average person, or readers and writers. If you consume horror, you've been practicing for shit to fit the fan. So I think that for me was a surprising sort of revelation for myself personally. It's something that I didn't quite realize about myself. Like, I've always been a pretty calm person under pressure. And when I was in the hospital with COVID, I very vividly remember having a conversation with a nurse, and it was clear that she had this conversation like a trillion times that year. But, what do you want to happen if it comes to you're circling the drain, so to speak? Do you want to be on a respirator? Do you want us to take any heroic measures to save your life if that's what it comes to? And like, I think what happened during the pandemic is a lot of people were very scared of that. Like, they were scared of dying. And it's not that I'm not scared of dying, but I'm calmer about it than some other people. So I'm having this conversation with her, and I recognize that, gee, this is bad. But I'm making jokes about it to her. Like, I have a pretty dark sense of humor, and so I'm making these jokes. And for me, like, I was like, oh, this is just me being me. And I'm like, I should probably maybe take this more seriously. But then probably a couple of weeks, a month, or whatever it was after I got out of the hospital, I had read this study that came out of the Recreational Fear Lab. And I was like, oh, that makes sense now. So for me, it was sort of a moment that, like, I could have gone to therapy for years and not had that revelation. But that to me was a really interesting moment that sort of changed the way I thought, not just about myself, but about horror. And I think a lot of people, when they understand sort of the mechanisms of how building resilience works in terms of what you think of as horror, I think that makes a lot of people sort of sit up and take notice and think differently about who they are and what they like and why.
Interesting. Okay, so you've talked about how it's a positive thing, right? To write horror, and you're talking about the resilience. Is there any type of negative? Like, is there any emotional toll of dealing in the dark that can affect someone?
Yes, but not necessarily for me. I have had nothing but positive experiences. If you are someone who has certain mental illnesses, a steady diet of horror is maybe not such a great idea. There's this theory, exposure therapy in psychology, where you are exposed to the thing that you're afraid of in order not to be afraid of it anymore.
Mhm.
I've heard it like with spiders and stuff like that, like you pet a spider that they put on your hand or whatever. That to me is a lot of what happens when you're reading horror. You're building resilience, you're exposing yourself to being scared in order not to be scared of other things.
Mhm.
Some people, that is just not a thing that they should be doing. And I couldn't tell you sort of who those people are. It's sort of like a case by case basis. But interestingly, there is some speculation that if the idea of using horror to build resilience, like if it catches on, like in a more broad way, that this could be sort of a prescription. Like, go watch a horror movie and call me in the morning. You know what I mean? Instead of taking an aspirin.
Right.
Uh, it's it's not an unheard of thing. During the earliest parts of the pandemic, do you remember what the most popular films were?
No, I know there's Netflix. People watch Netflix all the time, but I don't remember any particular. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on a second.
I bet
Yeah,
you
the one
know.
with Dustin
Yes,
Hoff. Yeah. Okay.
yes. So Contagion is not necessarily like a thing that most people think of as a horror film, but it is. That was really popular. And zombie films. Zombie films were incredibly popular because of the parallels to a pandemic. And so you were watching these things, sort of trying to figure out like how you should react, what's going to come next. And so kind of thinking about it that way, it's clear that even people who didn't obviously understand the mechanisms of horror were still going out of their way to watch these films in order to prepare themselves.
Okay, let me ask you this. What's the weirdest or maybe unexpected places your horror writing has taken you?
So, last year, I did a conference in Iceland, which was unexpected to say the least. In Reykjavik, there is a conference that they have every year called Iceland Noir, and it's thrillers, horror, sort of anything that fits into the noir genre, right? So I did not expect to get an invitation to go to Iceland. I'm with a small press. I'm not particularly well known as a writer. And I'm very not well known as a horror academic because I'm kind of just getting started. So I went to Iceland, which I've been to Iceland several times. I love it there. It's one of my favorite places. And within a 24-hour period, the volcano erupted. So that was unexpected. Two, I did a panel discussion, which was great fun. And I had a wonderful time. And I met some wonderful, amazing people. And third, I saw the Northern Lights from my balcony that night.
Very
So
cool.
that was incredibly unexpected. You don't really see Northern Lights in Reykjavik all that much because of the light pollution. So the fact that you could see them at all, plus there was the volcano still happening, was all very strange and wonderful. But the other thing I did this year that was also really unexpected is I gave a panel discussion on the benefits of young adult horror for teen readers to the American Library Annual Conference, which I forget exactly how many librarians were there, but I want to say it was over 20,000. Yeah, it was a ridiculous number of people. Now, not all of those people came to my panel, but it was a pretty crowded house for that. It was like on a Monday morning, the last day of the conference. It was like I didn't expect to have that many people in the room.
Where was this?
It was in Philadelphia,
Okay.
where I'm
I
from.
know a librarian. I'll have to ask him if he's been to
Yeah.
this. Who knows? Maybe he's been to
Um,
your panel.
you never know. So the ALA conference also jumps around coast to coast in the middle, every year. And it just happened to be in Philadelphia this year. So, I'm the kind of person who was like, if you don't ask, you don't get. And you can tell by that. I used to be a nonprofit fundraiser. But so I'm like, I'm just going to put a proposal in because why not? And Philadelphia area has an incredibly rich number of young adult horror writers and adult horror writers. And so I asked a bunch of my friends if they wanted to maybe be part of this proposal that I was putting together. And they're like, yeah, let's do it. And we got picked. So that was like an incredibly weird situation and a wonderful situation. And after the panel, I had some amazing conversations with librarians who were fascinated by how great reading horror is for people. And so I know that after they left this conference, there are some changes happening to collections because of what we did. And that makes me feel really good.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned selling. It seems like everybody I interview so far in this show, not everybody, but it seems like most people for their careers, there seems like there is also a sales portion to it in some
Yeah.
respects. So I almost feel like maybe a suggestion for a lot of people, regardless of whether choosing writing or a lot of careers, that I almost feel like maybe do a little sales for a bit might help you,
It can.
in
I think part of being a writer is knowing how to sell yourself. And I hate the idea of thinking of myself as a brand, but sort of in this particular atmosphere of social media, you kind of have to at least kind of think about it that way. No matter how sort of icky or gross it feels, you can still be authentic when you're doing that. You just have to find a way that's comfortable for you.
Yeah. Okay. Now back at when you talked about the librarians, you said that you brought up young adult horror. So, so being young adult horror is one of your specialties. How do you navigate writing scary content for teens without crossing maybe lines that make the parents or the educators uncomfortable? How does that work?
So I should specify here that I'm someone who grew up in a house where no one cared what I read. I mean, obviously, Stephen King, right? Um, my mom was just happy that I was reading for pleasure. And so I know things are a little bit different now, but because I was able to read without interference from parents, from teachers, from librarians, whatever that is, I tend to write for younger readers without worrying what their parents or teachers will think. I trust young readers to know themselves well enough to know what they can handle and what they want to read. And that's not to say that writing for adults versus young adults isn't different, because it is. There's a responsibility when you're writing for young adults or younger readers to leave readers with a kernel of hope. Now, that can take a lot of different forms, but the idea is to avoid the idea that all hope is lost and there's absolutely nothing you can do to change your situation. Even in adult horror, there's a message that you're sending that you have the power to kill the monsters or to overcome the bad things in your life, right? So I think maybe I don't necessarily worry about what I write for younger readers being too gory, because I don't write necessarily sort of hardcore gore. And maybe if I did tend toward that, I might be more cognizant of it. But for the most part, I just kind of write what I write because I know that there's an audience for it and that they will find it if this is a thing that's appealing to them. Interestingly, though, I've had a very good response from librarians. A Misfortune of Lake Monsters has been chosen by a number of libraries as like a book of the month or a book that gets pulled out. and is, you know, suggested to their younger readers.
All right. All right. Thanks for that. Okay. Final question. What is a secret about being a horror writer that most people would not know?
Okay. I know for a fact that this is a controversial statement because I know a number of horror writers who vehemently disagree with me.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah. So I believe that horror is a much wider genre than most people think. Now, there are dozens and dozens of horror subgenres, right? There's horror romance, there's, you know, a whole bunch of stuff. For me, horror is sort of what you make it. And so for me, the movie Titanic is a horror film. Because everybody in the end, well, almost everybody, dies screaming or frozen.
Yeah.
Like the first half of that movie, sure, call it a romance, call it whatever you want. The end of that film, pure horror. And I think, honestly, because of the way that I think about horror, it reflects in my writing. And maybe that's why I don't necessarily write a lot of hardcore gore. And horror doesn't have sort of the very rigid parameters that, say, romance does. And so there's not a lot of pressure for you to conform since there are no very rigid boundaries. So I don't know. I say write what makes you happy, develop your own style, and think of horror as you want to.
Excellent. Nicole, I appreciate you being on the show. It's been great.
Shane, I appreciate you having me.
All right. I'll talk to you later. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Shane.